What pain in me has lacked prayerful words? Wow. Just sit with that question for a second, would you? When we think about counseling, our first instinct is usually to look outward, right? We want to figure out how to fix someone else's struggle. But the source material throws a bit of a curveball right out of the gate. It suggests that before we even think about helping others, we actually need to look inward and reflect on our own hidden, unspoken pain.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating framework from chapters 4 and 5 of the biblical counseling curriculum, the Psalms as counsel. We're going to look at exactly how the text uses the Psalms. And we're not just talking about reading beautiful ancient poetry from a distance here. No, this is about using the Psalms as a profound, truly functional vocabulary for raw human struggle.
So, instead of a standard agenda today, let's just look at our thematic North Star. The aim here is to receive the Psalms as God-given language for lament, quiet trust, protest, memory, and hope. Basically, we are moving totally away from polite, tidy religious speech. So often sincere believers think faith requires, suppressing what they feel or just putting on a brave face. But the source material completely pushes back on that. It insists that God doesn't bypass our messy inner life. He actually gives it words. The Psalms literally provide us with a raw, honest vocabulary.
Now, treating biblical counsel as some sort of mechanical formula is incredibly tempting, isn't it? Just step one, step two. But look at this quote. It warns that we are not simply gathering information that can be transferred into another person like water poured from one cup to another. If counseling is treated as just a mere data transfer, the curriculum argues it completely fails to sustain wise love. Actually, the text challenges readers to stand under Scripture until it fundamentally changes the way they see God, themselves, and ultimately the actual person sitting right in front of them.
Section 1, Beyond Polite Religious Speech, Exploring the Full Human Experience. So how exactly do we guide people, and honestly ourselves, to bring the full, completely unedited range of human experience directly to God, rather than, say, trying to go around Him or hide from Him? It's super fascinating how the curriculum captures the sheer breadth of the Psalter here. Just look at the contrast. On one side, we've got Psalm 131. This is a beautiful portrait of quieted trust, like a weaned child. It represents a soul that has finally stopped striving to control what it literally cannot control. It's a total renunciation of control. But then, flip the script and look at the complete opposite mood on the other side, with Psalm 10. This is the loud, completely legitimized cry of the sufferer, the victim of injustice, shouting out, "Why, O Lord, do you stand far off?" The framework highlights how the Psalms authorize both of these, the quiet peace and the loud, angry protest, turning both of them Godward without ever ending up in unbelief.
Which brings us to Section 2, Rooms for the Soul, Spaces for Every Emotion.
To really wrap our heads around how to use these different Psalms, David Powelson's text brilliantly illustrates this concept by describing the Psalms as rooms large enough for real life. I love that phrasing. The text explains that polite, sanitized religious speech often just cannot hold our actual messy experiences. But the Psalms, they give us rooms. There's a room for fear, there's a room for absolute rage, a room for envy, a room for complete bewilderment, and yes, a room for quieted trust. The reading argues that any counseling that ignores these rooms just becomes way, way too tidy for actual human suffering. All right, let's look at Section 3, Praying Before Solving, Why We Shouldn't Rush the Lament. Embracing these rooms requires a pretty massive shift in our natural human instincts. We love to fix things, don't we? We want to solve problems immediately and make the pain go away. But the crucial point here is this pastoral caution directly from the text. Do not rush lament into lesson. A psalm can be faithful before it feels resolved. I really want to emphasize what the curriculum is saying here. We have got to slow down. So many helpers just want to solve everything before a person has even learned to speak truthfully before God. But the source material explains that true care actually means letting a person learn that their pain has somewhere holy to go. We shouldn't be rushing the lamenter into some kind of artificial cheerfulness. So let's see how this all builds into the actual movement of wise care. Here's the 5-step progression the curriculum outlines. Listen, clarify, interpret, speak, and finally practice. Now, it's absolutely essential to understand that this is presented as a fluid, compassionate progression. It is definitely not a rigid or hurried checklist. If someone's immediate urge is to just start dishing out advice before truly listening, well, the protocol outlined here is super clear. Slow down, clarify, listen, ask humble questions, and really seek to understand the person and their unique context first.
Moving on to Section 4, the counselor's own psalm, turning the mirror inward.
Because a concept only becomes pastoral wisdom when it passes through a counselor's own humility, prayer, and obedience, we absolutely have to look at this powerful warning from the course material. It says, do not confuse having a role with inhabiting that role redemptively. The text is really stressing here that just possessing the title of a helper or a counselor or a leader doesn't automatically mean someone is actually operating with a heart of one. The authors make a really sharp point. It is incredibly easy to carry the grief and confusion of others, but then turn around and speak to God only in these functional, completely detached prayers about ministry outcomes. In fact, the curriculum turns a really direct reflection question right back onto the helper. It asks, which relational chair do I use to avoid dependence, confession, patience, or humbly service? Let's just pause deliberately for a second and think about that. The text challenges us to ask if we are actually using our role as a helper as a sort of shield. It really pushes readers to identify the log in their own eye and to ask themselves where their knowledge might have outrun their actual love. And if a counselor doesn't do that deep inward reflection, well, the curriculum outlines exactly what happens. It says the counselor who does not allow truth to become personal will usually become either mechanical or performative. The framework insists that letting a psalm counsel you first is literally the only way to avoid speaking down from some high balcony above another person's struggle. The imagery used here is brilliant. It suggests you have to speak from the road where mercy has already met you. The core idea is simple but profound. Counselors are taught by first being counseled themselves.
And that brings us to Section 5, Practices for Wise Love, some tangible actions we can take.
So how do we actively apply all of this? The curriculum outlines a few concrete practices for the week. First, engaging in lament. Second, praying many psalms. And third, maintaining a non-anxious presence with unresolved sorrow. The text really stresses that we should avoid making grand, sweeping spiritual declarations. Instead, real change is described as happening through small, honest movements repeated over and over before God. We're talking about one confession, one clarified desire, one psalm prayed, or just one conversation entered into with a little less self-protection.
And that brings us to our closing thought from the material. Lord, teach us to see more truly so that we may love more wisely. I want to leave you with that profound final prayer to really cement your reflective journey through these chapters. Because if the goal is to offer genuine, scripture-shaped care, the text concludes that we absolutely must first allow that scripture to search our own hearts. So what small, honest movement do you need to make today? Thanks so much for joining me in this explainer.